So this is a US West Coast panel. Good morning, everyone. Originally, JP Schmetz, the chief scientist of Burda, would be sitting here and moderating, but he heard it is back and he asked me to jump in. So you have to deal with me, but we should maybe send a round of applause to JP, who will probably listen in so that he gets well pretty soon. Let's give a round of applause. And then while we are on it, let's give a round of applause to the two giants of the internet that are actually sitting here. I'm pretty sure most of you are well aware Brendan is the inventor of JavaScript. He has been CTO and CEO of Firefox at that point in time, the largest and most influential and most important web browser. Sridhar, well, let's... Sridhar joined Google in 2003 when the media industry in Europe still thought, Google, what's that? Why do you send away traffic? I think as an engineer, and he grew within Google as much as Google grew, and until 2018, he was leading the 105 billion advertising business of Google. So if you hate ads, talk to him. He then went on to found Neva, an ad-free search engine. Let's give him a big round of applause. Thank you. I'll need to take my notes out, but I can ask the first question. Sridhar, Google, 105 billion ad revenue, without any doubt, in the perception of most people, a very good search engine. You've been there a long time, and then 2019 you decided to found another search engine with a completely different paradigm. We are among friends. Are you crazy? What brought you to found Neva?
Well, there's always an element of implausibility about every startup. And Neva is very hard because it's taking on an incredibly well-funded, and let's face it, at least like in the US, generally liked incumbent. But my co-founder and I actually felt that it was really important that there be choice for search. All of us search every day. We don't really think about it. We just go do it. And monocultures produce complacency. They produce bad products. I came to the conclusion that ultimately Google search was a product for advertisers, not you and me. And that's the founding mission of Neva. We want to create a product that's all about you, the user. Is it crazy? Yes, a little bit. But you know, every now and then you also look for transformational changes, like the one in generative AI that's happening right now. So I actually feel very fortunate that we are on the cusp of what I think will be a lot of changes to how all of us use software. And I think Neva is very well positioned.
Very nice. Thank you for that introduction. Brendan, I could ask the same question. Firefox 2015, at that point in time, probably the most important browser, challenged by Google Chrome, a good browser. A lot of you guys will use it. Some might use WebKit on Safari. Why do you feel there is place for another browser? And then later you added search, Brave Search. Why?
Yes. Search, we owe a debt to Burda for Cliqz, where the team came from, and the assets. We already had a great deal of experience doing a browser on open source. Originally, I had my co-founder and I had worked on Mozilla, and then Chromium, which was forked from WebKit in large part, became good enough that we could do something that was going to be different at a higher level of discourse. So Brave is trying to be user-first in a meaningful way, which means our economics depend on users. You can opt into, but you do not have to opt into a private ad system. If you do, we pay 70% of the gross revenue. We do not track or identify you. All the matching of the ads is done with local machine learning. That model had never been tried. There have been things like it that inevitably took your data out and suffered conflicts of interest against the user. We're still building Brave up on this user-first model. And I think that's important to have a browser that does that. And of course, search is the flip side of the browser. This is something we all learned over the years. I remember when I first met Sergey Brin in 2004, Google didn't have a browser, so we had Firefox, and Google had a great search, so it was a perfect marriage at the time. But then Chrome came out, and Chrome's hard to beat unless you differentiate a level up.
So, Brendan, we could obviously continue for ages, Sridhar, as well, but maybe one or two persons here in the round are not that familiar with what browsers and search are. Or if we go later for a beer to Hofbräuhaus and you would talk to the waiter, explain to her why she should use Brave Search. What do you make better?
So I agree with the idea that advertising in search has subtly, I think, degraded search. Whether that was intended or not, it's been a consequence. I remember Google search in the early days, even with ads, was very good, and the ads were good, and I still use it, and often the ads are good, but there's just been too much.
A lot of small decisions.
Yes.
Each one of them was perfectly fine individually, but you add them up over 10 years, you are at the mess the internet is at today.
And at the iPhone, I can't even see the organic results. They're below the fold. So I think with a new approach to search, you can do things quicker and in more innovative ways than Google, which has all these obligations as a mature public company. No offense to them, right?
That's right, that's right.
Sridhar, you even ask your users to pay.
That's right.
Is anyone paying for search?
It turns out that there are multiple hard problems here, clearly, as you put it. But the first one is obviously creating a good product. But the bigger one is getting people to care about switching their browser or switching their search engine. Most people don't really want to be bothered. On an iPhone, for example, they just use Safari. And Apple doesn't even make it possible for them to switch their search engine within Safari. So most people, this does not rise up. So I would say the biggest hurdle that we have is not the monetization. Heavy users of search are indeed signing up for subscriptions. It is getting people to make that delta change. And to be honest with you, for the first 3 years, this has been very rough because we both, like Brave Search, Neva Search, has been competing with Google Search on what I call the promise of 10 blue links. And most people don't care. All links look the same to them. I think what we are now at the threshold of is AI offering a much deeper level of understanding of every page, of what is really underneath the page that you are looking at. And so you have to create, in my opinion, a transformationally better experience for people to even switch, and then for a fraction of them to pay. And the nice thing about being a startup is, I would suspect that to run search for the entire planet, Google spends probably $1 billion in operational cost and maybe another $1 billion to $2 billion in people cost to run it. But I think a startup can do this with a few small number of hundreds of millions of dollars. So, we are talking about 20 to 30 million subscribers to be a nice, profitable company with aspirations for more. I actually think that that is achievable. We are not talking about getting 1 billion subscribers. So even small percentage points, because the market is so large, can have a big impact.
I like how you say a small startup was a couple of 100 million, but we can discuss this later. But I mean, you described this very nicely. You just say we have to have the better quality, maybe use a buzzword like AI, and then you have 20, 30 million. When you decided to do this, Larry Page must have called you and showed you this picture of the data centers that they always used to tell everyone it's impossible to build a search engine. He must have called you and said, look, we spend billions, we have smarter people. What's your competitive edge? How do you compete around the data? How do you compete around the data centers? How do you compete around the distribution? And Brendan, that question will come to you as well, and I assume you got the call as well.
By doing more with less. Startups just have to understand that they live in a constrained world. Our team, believe it or not, is a little over 50 people. Okay, not 5,000, it's a little over 50 people, and we spend millions of dollars, not tens of millions, not hundreds of millions, certainly not billions, in our search infrastructure. But what we do have are some of the greats that built many key aspects of search that are really wanting to create a much better experience. So a lot of, Neva is about doing a whole lot more with very, very, very few people. But even if I say so myself, the product speaks for itself. We were able to bring things like, a search experience driven by AI, but things done in such a way that it is believable AI. Everybody talks about ChatGPT, but we also know that it hallucinates freely. We avoid that. We show citations. We incorporate real-time data. So the fact that this is done by a team that runs a pretty big size crawl, that runs a pretty big system, is a testament to human ingenuity. And yes, as I said earlier, there's always an element of impossibility about every startup until it turns and becomes possible. So we're able to move very quickly. We have advantages. Like people like Vivek, my co-founder, and I, we want to make a difference to the world. Like you said earlier, if you hate ads, I probably had something to do with it. This is my way of paying my dues back to the world. I sincerely think that products should be about people. They should be about serving. They should not be about exploiting. I'm proud of what we are doing at Neva.
That may explain why people should pay for things, because I do think you should pay for software if you can afford to do so and you are motivated to do so. So Brave Search also has a premium leg that's already operating. People buy it, several hundred people a month out of their own goodwill, in order to foreclose the possibility of ads in our free leg. And it's several thousand growing now, maybe 10,000, I don't know. And so we're not betting the farm on it, but it's an important option. And I do think people should pay for software. I think one of the pre-Google corruptions on the web was the ad impressions and the model that everything is free and you can make it up through this somewhat fraud-prone system called ad tech. So yes, we have a small team too that's scrappy, and I think innovation is needed now. If you ask me, when Firefox 1.0 was out, Google was clearly the winner. 10 years after that or so, a friend, you may know him, R.B. Guha, shared with me that Bing and Google for the same query gave similar results, sometimes identical, but it didn't matter. There was a brand halo, so if you swapped the branding and did user research, you would find Google was always the best. And it was hard to beat them even then. But I think now there's an opening. Google, as good as it is, especially for long tail, is not really as good as it has been, and it's crowding its own results with its own promotions and tied properties.
They tried to shut us down. Microphone has gone off.
Okay.
But do users notice this quality difference in a way that they would really change?
Some users do. So how do you move markets? This is something I did several times. Arguably at Netscape, I was a year late, and they were already taking market from Mosaic. But then with Firefox, we restarted the browser market, which was considered impossible at the time. Conventional wisdom was Microsoft had monopolized it, and it was Internet Explorer forever. But we restarted it by appealing to lead users, as Eric von Hippel of MIT calls them, or the early adopters, the influencers who actually create as well as consume. These are important cohorts, and they're different cohorts to gather when you start a new effort like a browser or a search engine. So how do you do that? You have to innovate in a way that appeals to those lead users, and they're not your average, and they do notice differences in quality, especially on certain queries for search engines, on certain features for browsers.
I would say up until the beginning of this year, it's only the fanatics, people that really cared about privacy, people that said, I want an alternative. These were the ones that switched to Google. They were in the millions, not like huge numbers. But when our first Neva AI launch went out early this year, that's when actually friends started writing to me and said like, oh my God, this is magic. The fact that you got an answer assembled in real time that was believable, that actually had citations, so that you didn't have to go anywhere else. That's actually what convinces people. So you need these innovations. When you use Brave, it's very clear how quick it is. It is very clear, like the sleek experience. Similarly in search, when there is something that hits you in the face and says, wow, that's a better experience, that's what causes movement and change.
If we jump to the future, obviously in the future, you two take over search, but every journalist right now writes ChatGPT will kill search. So is ChatGPT killing you too? Am I sitting on the wrong panel? Sridhar, are you working on the wrong thing?
I'm sure all of you have played with ChatGPT. It is remarkable in its fluency. But I think of large language models really as a modern day interpreter. Like you can speak to it in German, and it'll give you perfectly good English. You can ask it to recite a story, it'll come up with a great story. But what these models do not have is a firm understanding of who is believable and what is believable. So ChatGPT, as it is not going to be the replacement for real information. And so that is part of what we are addressing, which is how do you ground a generative model in the reality that exists on the web? How do you ground it in things as they are happening? So I think there's a lot of change to come on top of ChatGPT. But the broader thing that I would say is that any information function, search is fun to talk about because it is a big industry. But if you're writing email for a living, if you're producing documents for a living, if you're creating copy for a living, if you're exchanging legal documents for a living, you have to assume that these generative models are going to have a pretty profound influence. Not necessarily a good influence, by the way. All of us that work in software, in tech, have been really cocky over the last 30 years because those poor people working in factories lose their jobs, but not us. We are the invincible. But I think you're going to see this change over the next 10 years, where a lot of information workers see their jobs affected in very significant ways. I'm not smart enough to figure out, is it going to create jobs? Is it going to make people lose jobs? But I think there are big changes coming, not just to search, but to any information function.
Even artists, creative artists, people making graphic novels, right? Mid-Journey or spatial diffusion. These will disrupt those fields, and many artists will probably prosper by learning how to do good prompts and learning how to work with the tools.
And I think, and by the way, the work produced by great artists when they're using one of these tools is way better than what you or I can do. That is clearly there. Another fun story, you're going to have an ad personally done by Brendan telling you to switch to Brave. It'll be addressed to you. It'll be a beautiful video. It's the power of generative AI.
It's when you mentioned, look, every email that can be written will be written by generative AI. I'm thinking about mass personalization of email marketing,
right.
But I'm also thinking about mass spam in the web. We guys know since 20 years the web has been a fight between people trying to make money and people trying to sort the information. Brendan, how do you deal with that? How do you fight the new way of spam?
Yeah, so definitely we'll see with generative AI lots of generated garbage and malicious attacks. But our search engine is based more on head of query log shared among all the users and those who opt into something called the Web Discovery Project, which is a way of growing our index incrementally based on our user base. So we don't have to run Google's amazing infrastructure. I remember Urs Hutzler used to give the tours, and you have these hierarchical robots that in real time can keep up with Twitter and Reddit. Not that it's worth it, right? ChatGPT often sounds like a mid-tier Redditor sometimes, not that smart. But we want to get the good stuff, not all the stuff. And that is helped by having an approach for indexing that's driven by our users, especially our lead users. And we look around corners and nearest neighbors, of course. So Web Discovery Project is one of our wins. We also cater to those who they have a different definition of safety, or they want to have a community view. They want to focus only on certain programming languages, so they can make something called a goggle. And we have goggles for all sorts of purposes. There are thousands now shared on GitHub for filtering the view of the index to customize what you see in those few links that come back.
Let me follow up on the bullshit you said, the bullshit in the meaning of ChatGPT can generate bullshit. But search engines have a history of stealing content. The media industry knows this pretty well, and we can argue whether a snippet is already theft or a rich snippet is it or not. Why don't you index the web just the first 10 pages, you feed these first 10 pages into ChatGPT and you give an answer, because no one likes searching, everyone likes finding. Is the media industry, will it be reduced to a cottage farm delivering content that by search engine is fed into generative AI and you will provide the answer?
I mean, I think, first of all...
You saw too long, that's a yes.
What's that?
That's a yes, so you saw long.
No, this is the reason why we don't believe in purely generated answers. We don't believe in search engines being an oracle. This is why we believe in citations. And early feedback for us has been that the citations actually drive more clicks. People are happy to go to links. But let's face it, part of the problem with the modern internet is that every click on your phone is an adventure. Not a good adventure. You go to that page, there's a pop-up that hits your face. There's a video that starts playing. So I think this AI is going to provide a good counterpoint where, here's a short synopsis, but I think quality will matter more. I think if something is said by the New York Times, it's going to matter a lot. By the way, I think UGC platforms, whether it's a Quora or a Reddit, are going to be enormous beneficiaries of the GPT revolution because they work hard to have real people in them. They have moderators that actually care. They work hard to keep out bots. I think there's actually going to be a premium on quality information.
Stack Exchange has banned ChatGPT, right? As far as I know.
That's right. Yeah. Because this is the problem. ChatGPT will confidently produce incorrect code that takes a lot of time for real people to show that is actually doing the wrong thing. I think you're going to see more and more things like this. I actually see media organizations like having more value because they actually stand behind the content that they create. But I do think this era of, there is going to be more consolidation, just like the printing press did mean more consolidation. The internet means that New York Times is the largest news publisher in the US. I think consolidation will accelerate, but I don't think the desire for quality information is going to go down.
I appreciate your work on citations. It's very good. The web needs to survive, and every time it's facing some kind of threat, people say it's over. You're just going to get this oracle, the new Pythia of Delphi that's going to give you the one answer, and there's no way to reverse the AI that came to that answer to find the original sources. But I think we have to fight for that because there isn't always one answer. That's why Google was so great. Even 10 or 20 possible answers can be important. And if it's only a few of those 10, it's still important to have that choice. So I think for certain verticals and certain cases, having a summary or an answer, and you just want to get an authoritative answer and there's not a lot of noise or junk on the web, the generative approach wins. But for other cases, you do want to see sources. You want to judge provenance. You want to see that citation and click through.
So if I understand you two correctly, you're saying, yes, we will do search differently. You are already doing it completely differently. Yes, we will see different business models. We will see AI being used. But the paradigm of you search and you get a certain set of information retrievals remains.
I think so. I think for some questions there can be answers. For I think many, it'll help simplify choice so that you can, at the end of the day, a search engine certainly is not going to ship a shoe to you. You need actual people that are selling shoes and e-commerce websites and things like that. So I think the model will change, but I think there will be essential elements of it that will continue to remain. But what I really hope is a move back to like a user-centered internet. I think of the internet as being very, very exploitative. It's all about grabbing our attention. Sadly, even the big media players, even the New York Times, writes headlines that are super clickbaity. So I hope this is somewhat of a restoration of the balance between users and technology providers.
Amen. Preach.
And let me ask one last question. You two seem to agree on a lot of things. Is there a place for two alternatives, or should you merge?
You don't know until you've run the course longer. I think differences, you'll see generative AI from Brave Search as well. The fact that we have private ads coming to the free leg and people can pay for premium makes us different. And we deal the user in. We always pay them at least the revenue we get on those ads when we sell that inventory. So we'll see how that works out. That system's not ready to launch, but we're working on it. And that will be denominated in the basic attention token, just like our private user ads are. So we'll see. I think there's room for innovation. It's an open question.
So there's no reason to have one newspaper for a city or a country. There's no reason to have a single TV channel or a single streaming provider. Diversity of choice makes for better outcomes. It's really important for us to remember this. I think the current world in which there is one search provider for the planet I tell people this is basically the same as one private company being in charge of giving drinking water to every person on the planet. Who wants that? To me, that's the reason why there should be choice. Trust me, if Neva is to be enormously successful and become the only search provider for the world, we will start doing dumb things because we have no incentive to not do these things. So to me, that's the real point. There needs to be lots of competition. So I hope all of you check out Neva.
Thank you so much.
If we ever became the dominant browser in search, I demand a recount.
Brendan, Sridhar, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everyone, try out neva.com and brave.com.
Thank you so much.